Now, without further ado, let me pass the floor to the moderator, the great moderator of the first session for today, Maruxa Cardama. She's the Secretary General of the SLOCAT Partnership for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, of which IRF is a very proud member. I leave you to the very competent hands of Maruxa, and I wish you a good discussion. Maruxa, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Susanna, and the entire IRF team. Good morning, good afternoon to all participants. It's really a delight to be here. Thanks for the opportunity that you are giving to SLOCAT. While I was preparing for this panel and trying to gather my thoughts about this question of embedding sustainability in infrastructure, I was thinking about some of the facts and figures of the latest edition of the SLOCAT Global Status Report on Transport and Climate Change. I was thinking, of course, that we know that transport emissions are not on the right track, that it's still the second highest emitting economic sector in 2019, and that it accounts for 14% of the global greenhouse gas emissions and for 24% of the energy-related emissions. Indeed, the COVID pandemic has led to a decrease in 19% of those CO2 emissions. But however, this equals roughly to what we would need to see in declines of emissions from the transport sector until 2050 and on an annual basis in order to be able to meet the climate targets of the Paris Agreement. I was also thinking that we continue experiencing an overall growth in the use of road vehicles, with road transport being something like 80% of the overall growing transport demand that we see, and that more goods than ever are being transported on tracks because really freight activity continues growing. We have also seen over the past decade how sport utility vehicles are the second largest source of CO2 emissions globally after the power industry. At the same time, because we are talking about a wider narrative, not just climate action, barriers to accessing equitable, healthy, green and resilient transport prevail. When we look at urban residents in the global south, half of them still need to commute more than 60 minutes in order to access services and jobs. On the brighter side, the latest developments are showing us that it is possible really to demonstrate that raising emissions from the transport sector are not inevitable, and that they can be avoided through target planning and finance. We are seeing the decoupling of economic prosperity and emissions continuing. We are approaching what it seems to be peak in transport, in car ownership in OECD countries. Electrification is already providing more efficient, cleaner and affordable mobility to billions across the world. We are also seeing that there's an increased number of jurisdictions and automakers setting targets for phasing out internal combustion engines. And we are also seeing how more stringent regulations are really helping in the right way. I'm thinking particularly here about EU regulations. And last but not least as well, we are seeing how access to improved walking and cycling infrastructure is really provoking an uptake in these zero emission modes. Fundamentally, therefore, transport is not only about negative impacts. Fundamentally, it's about access to socio-economic opportunity. And that's why the high vulnerability of transport infrastructure to climate change, to natural disasters, or to global shocks, such as a pandemic, is bad news for socio-economic development, particularly in developing countries, which are very much dependent on transport infrastructure, including roads for connectivity, for food and energy security, obviously for external trade, and also for tourism. The last figure that was coming to my mind is that the reality is that if we look at the investment transport needs, significant financing gaps prevail. Investments of over $40 trillion will be required between 2016 and 2030 to achieve low carbon transport pathways, and the majority of this support will be required to support emerging economies. So it was with all these facts, figures, and this analysis that I was coming, to really with excitement to listen to this terrific panel. IRF is spoiling us and has gathered for us this phenomenal lineup of speakers that you see in the slide. We have with us James Leather, who is the Chief of Transport Sector Group in the Asian Development Bank, and Jamie will be our keynote. And the keynote will be followed by a panel consisting of Mike Evans, who is the Global Highways Lead in ARUP, Konstantinos Koutsoukos, who is the President of Hellastron, Emanuela Stockey, who is the Director of International Affairs in AISCAT and the Chair of Sustainability in ASECAP. And last but not least, we will have a joint presentation by Liesbeth Casier, Senior Policy Advisor, and Laura Turley, Associate of the International Institute for Sustainable Development. As you can see, different perspectives and a very comprehensive take on these questions. So with no further ado, Jamie, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Maruxa. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have a few slides, and I will keep strictly to the time. So unfortunately, we'll have to be a bit selective in what we can cover today. But I wanted to highlight that there are many aspects of sustainability. So those that I'm highlighting here are the ones that we are seeing are of most importance in the Asia Pacific region, and particularly with the governments that we provide support to. Next slide, please. This slide is an overview of ADB's assistance going back over the last 4 decades. I just wanted to highlight this, not so much in terms of the type of support ADB is providing, but more that we respond to government's requests. And you can see on the right-hand side, the blue color relates to our road subsector support. Yes, there has been, in terms of proportion, there has been a reduction steadily over time, but it is still in the current pipeline, 50%. But if you look across the graph at the bottom, you will see that the blue is relatively stable. In fact, what is happening is that governments have been requesting support in other transport-related subsectors, while the road subsector continues to provide support. And at the moment, we are providing support up to $2 to $2.5 billion US dollars per year in the road subsector. There's a few things I will cover in the presentation, and these are listed. What is important and what is increasingly being requested from our client governments. Access is of vital importance. We are a development agency, and therefore access and ensuring that transport can fulfill its role as an enabler of development, providing access to jobs, education and health, as well as social. We have a big focus on asset management. There has been a lot of infrastructure built in the Asia Pacific region, but we are now at critical times in terms of the maintenance of that assets and how we can enhance either programs for asset management or look at broader life cycle analysis. As Maruxa was mentioning, emissions and road safety and other sustainable development goals or alignment with the Paris Agreement are also of vital importance to the support we provide. The changes we're seeing from our clients is very much towards system management and efficiency gains. And what they will seek from organizations like ADB, World Bank and others is value addition and looking at a broader use of financial services. What I mean by that is it's not just project finance, we're looking at programmatic support, which we can fund through results-based lending or policy-based lending. So we are seeing a shift which mirrors the change we're seeing in the graph on the right-hand side. Governments are seeking very different types of support from international finance agencies and development agencies. Next slide, please. But just on access, it's staggering how many, and these people in Asia who still do not have good quality access. And it's not just in rural areas, although 630 million rural population are more than 2 kilometers from an all-weather road. So this is one of the SDG indicators, but also in urban areas, 480 million. So combining those two, there are over 1 billion people in Asia who do not have good transport access. And while we may be the roads, rural roads in particular, but in urban areas, I just wanted to highlight Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, where the lack of a good road system means that public transport will not operate in many parts of the Gur areas where the yurts and the in-migration has been happening. And as we see rapid urbanization, there are many Asian cities where the infrastructure, the road infrastructure is very poor. Next slide, please. This is just highlighting some of our maintenance, and I do need to stress when we're asked to provide financial support, it is often time-bound in terms of the project preparation and the project implementation phases of projects, which does give us a problem in terms of the longer asset management components. But we are now seeing that we are extending the length of our involvement to ensure that we do provide not just in the initial years of operations, but hopefully out to significant maintenance points as we have been providing the support for the infrastructure itself. So here we're showing on of the 270 projects in the roads subsector, those with asset management. And this includes maintenance, capacity development and institutional strengthening within governments. I think this will be one area that we will see a lot of increase in coming years. And embedding DMF is our design and monitoring framework. So we are embedding road asset management requirements within our own support. And at the moment, 57% of our projects include enhanced road asset management and or maintenance, which may not sound a lot, but given that we are usually only up to the point of start of operations in terms of our direct involvement, it's showing that we're going beyond what we tended to do in the past, which was design and build, and we're now getting much more involved in the operations and the maintenance programs as well, either a standalone or linking that to the infrastructure development. Next slide, please. We're also using tools, and CAREC across the top, that is the Central Asia region. So we've been working with a number of the governments in Central Asia to understand their road asset management and where they are, and from that being able to plot where they may be in the future. And the spider graph here is for each of our member countries within the Central Asia region, we assessed their performance under the various indicators that you can see around on the slide. Next slide, please. Overlaying on this, we have discussions with the government about what they are actually trying to achieve and what they want with their assets. That's in the blue on the right-hand side. At the bottom in the brown, how do they make decisions? And perhaps most importantly, when it comes to maintenance programs, where is the money coming from and how is it spent? There is almost inevitably an underfunding of road asset management, a predominance in terms of new infrastructure, but much less so on operations and maintenance of the road assets. So what supporting processes are in place? And we're utilizing these tools to have that discussion with governments. And from these initial discussions, we are evolving asset management support and program development within many of the developing countries. Next slide, please. Some of the components, and you will see a number of countries listed in here. So it's just really to give you a flavor of the types of countries we're working in and the types of support we're providing. Obviously, conventional FIDIC type arrangements are embedded in all our projects. We always use the FIDIC approach for contracting, but we are using more performance-based contracts in Laos, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Nepal. Also looking at results-based lending in the Solomon Islands. So trying to understand which, in different contexts in different developing countries at various stages and with different skills, either in governments or in the local contracting businesses, what is the most suitable? And a number of hybrid projects. These are proving very successful in India, but we're also using hybrid contracts in Georgia. One area where I see most interest is really on the policy support. And rather than providing that design build type support, just looking at a programmatic support, this will also be able to allow us to have an impact at scale. If we start to support governments in management of a road network, clearly we can have a much broader impact on the quality of that road network, the ability for that road network to provide access to employment and education, but also allow us to look at some of the other sustainability goals on emissions, vehicle standards, road safety as well. So we're definitely seeing much greater emphasis being placed on programmatic support. Next slide, please. One tool that we are working with World Bank and the UK government and others is HDM4. Now, we believe this is a very useful tool. Its fundamentals are highly utilized over many years, so they still have a lot to offer. And we were looking to upgrade this so we can ensure that it is taking account of the broader sustainability objectives that we're all trying to reach. So we're highlighting here some of the use of HDM4 in terms of assessment of decarbonization of the roads transport as well. Next slide, please. I think this is my last slide. I know we're running short of time, but I did just want to mention that monitoring of what is happening in the transport sector is a very important part. And together with others, we have been working on the Asian Transport Outlook, which is open source. You will all be able to access it, and please do so. It's database that looks at the transport infrastructure, the transport activities, and the transport externalities, so emissions, road safety. And it also includes assessments of transport-related policies and transport-related financing. And a number of our assessments are looking at how the data, what is the length of road network by various classes, what is the quality of that road network, how much budget is being allocated, and once you start to overlay one indicator with another, you really start to see either a worrying trend in underinvestments or a prioritization. And having better knowledge, better information will lead to better decision-making process. So we are pushing the Asian Transport Outlook to be able to have better informed discussions with our client governments and hopefully move from beyond pure missing link infrastructure support to entire road network management support. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I stayed within the 10 minutes. Back to you, Maruxa.
You did. Thank you so very much, Jamie. That was fascinating. I mean, you're reminding us that roads are still needed, that it's still an access issue in many places. Also very interesting to see those evolving demands from your client countries, isn't it? How road maintenance, as you were saying, it's so central. That notion of a programmatic approach that you're wanting to put into these road maintenance. I was also very curious to see the institutional capacity, you know, being so prominent as well in part of what you're doing. It's still there, isn't it? And finally, Asian Transport Outlook, better data to inform better decision making. I think it's very much something that we could export to any other regions of the globe, isn't it? Not just the Asian region. So thank you very much. You've certainly fulfilled the tall order of the keynote to get us, you know, to get our brains provoked and get started. So it's now when I pass it on to our panel. And we are going to be starting with Mike Evans. As you remember, Mike is the Global Highways Lead in ARUP. Mike, the floor is yours, please. Let's go.
Hello, everybody. Great to see you. I'm going to get through quite a lot of stuff, so I'll post some material in the chat. So first up, we need to change what our road networks look like. Why? We've got a problem with emissions in transport. We use too much resources in the maintenance and construction and operation of our road networks. And actually, sometimes our road networks that we have poor outcomes for society and the planet. So what do we need to do? We need to have a more balanced way of looking at the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And the way that I try and do that is I look at the SDGs as a framework, and I say it's about outcomes for society and outcomes for the planet, and we're trying to get the right balance. We in ARUP, we try to adopt a total value approach to this question. And what we mean by that is we want to think about not just the traditional cost-benefit analysis, measuring time savings and generating an economic return, but we need to be thinking about social and natural value as well. So what do we need to do? We need to begin to think about transport in a different way, of the transport paradigm, thinking more about active travel, how we get that to work in our networks. Public transport. Public transport is not just about trains. Most public transport needs roads to operate efficiently, so we need good roads for public transport. And we still will have cars, as James mentioned. They're necessary for journeys that cannot be taken by walking or cycling or public transport. Increasingly, we're seeing governments think about how we get the outcomes from our road networks in a different way. I've got some examples here from Scotland and Ireland, and they're talking about more focus on reducing inequalities, tackling climate action, delivering inclusive economic growth, and having better outcomes for health and well-being. I mentioned the modal hierarchy already, but there's also the intervention hierarchy, an emphasis on maintaining and optimizing what you already have, then thinking about improving what you have, and then only at the end think about new build solutions. I want to talk just for a little minute about cars, and just, you know, we can't just assume that conversion to low emission vehicles will solve all our problems. Car manufacturers want to sell us more cars. They'll make better cars. They'll be electric. They'll require less maintenance. It'll be easier to use. There'll be autonomy. And what that will do, it'll make it easier to drive. And that has the risk of driving up transport demand, which will increase resource consumption. So we need to be thinking about that. How do we do that? Well, we need to focus on what we always needed to do, was the principles of avoid, shift, and improve. And that's about making sure that you don't have to travel all the time. And this morning is a great example of that. We're all doing this conference without having to travel. Public transport, walking, cycling, how you build your society, and then and only then do you think about your vehicle efficiency. I want to go through now for a few minutes just some examples of how we can reimagine our road network. And I'm going to use 6 themes. These are on our website. Just to think about that, what a future road network will look like and some of the components of that. So I've mentioned already the need to think about our roads as a multimodal transport platform. And we're doing enormous work around the world on major bus public transport for urban areas, projects like Bus Connects in Dublin, Brisbane Metro, and I'm working in the Philippines, for example. But we also need to begin to think about our interurban roads as public transport platforms. We have tended in the past to focus on cars and goods vehicles. So what's that going to look like? We're going to need to think like public transport engineers as road network operators. How do you design the interchange? Public transport is about proximity, frequency, convenience. So we need to have access to public transport on our networks, designing interchange with other modes. So at the edge of the city, are you connected properly up in a park and ride to the train system? Have you got cycling facilities so somebody can park their bike beside the bus? Moving on from that, our road networks are enormous. They're huge land assets. And actually they can become important opportunities for biodiversity net gain. What can you do on your land to sequester carbon? What's your ecological potential of your road network? Can you reconnect severed habitats by using your linear network to do that? Moving on a couple of steps. Digital yesterday was mentioned, but we can use digital technology as transformational in what we do as well. An example some of my colleagues will talk about later on is how can we think about reimagining road user charging as a mechanism for demand management, for example. I want to talk about embodied carbon now. What do we need to think about in terms of reducing the carbon that's used in the construction and operation and maintenance of our roads? And circular economy can be a useful reference way of thinking about that. Couple of ideas to think about there. We try to adopt a layers approach. And what do we mean by that? So engineers have a tendency to design things to be durable, but actually we need to think about how we reuse everything in our network. So we need to put things that have a short lifespan to be easily accessible so they can be reused. So the pavement layers need to be designed so the material can be completely reused. We need to make sure that we don't put surfaces that are going to be dug up where you need to break out concrete. Another thing we need to think about is that circular economy is just no longer about recycling. It's about repair and refurbishment, keeping an asset over its life cycle and used for the longest possible time. And maybe even thinking, do you need to actually build a new asset? Can you use what you already have? We need to think about how we design for low emission vehicles. Our road networks are going to increasingly have electric cars on them. How do we provide the charging infrastructure for those vehicles? How's that going to work? What's the role of hydrogen in that process? And one last thought, this interaction, the way we're going to change how vehicles are powered means that our transport systems are going to overlap with our energy systems in a much more intense way. And our road networks can become energy distribution and power generation opportunities, for example. I want to move on a little bit now and just think about talking to you about how we design our road networks. What we've done in the past is we've designed road networks to be safe, efficient, and provide fast mobility. And what that has done is we tend to build a very large road, and then we bring all the traffic to that road, and then it is distributed off that very main artery. That has led us to develop hierarchical networks. And those networks involve having longer distances. And when you're trying to reduce carbon emissions, distance matters. It's something that we have to bear in mind because remember, if you increase the distance, you increase the amount of energy required to complete that journey. So just to take that forward a little bit and think about how private vehicles work, cars work, how we design for public transport. If we're going to be designing our roadway networks now to be more in favor of public transport rather than a private car, we need to rethink how we do that. We need to think about how we make it more convenient to travel on a bus on a road rather than a private car. And that requires quite a considerable amount of thinking about how journeys take place. This is new thinking for road engineers, it's traditional thinking for public transport engineers. So what we want to do is we want to think about how that major road we're going to build, if we bring it weaving around the countryside, avoiding obstacles, we take it away from the places that people want to gain access to public transport. This leads us into a type of thinking that we're going to have to increasingly adopt, which is thinking about users. We need user-centered design much more than we have. We're not designing for cars anymore, we're designing for passengers. And that's a different way of thinking about it. We tend to analyze our movements on our road networks as traveling from A to B, but actually most people don't make their journey from A to B, they go from A to B to C. There's complexity in journeys, both in goods delivery journeys and the way individuals make their journeys. And we need not to think of people just as one uniform group of people. People are different, there's different ages in society, gender, and different stages of people's lives, whether they're in education or at work or in retirement. We call this agent-based modeling, and it gives us a better way to analyze what people are doing. And if we do that, then we can get public transport on our road networks to work better. And just to give you some thinking about that is, you know, how do you deliver public transport to somebody in a rural situation? That's much more complicated. Thinking about how we allow people to travel to work and make the stops that people are making on their journeys. So for example, people on their way to work drop the kids to school, they need to do other messages, they need to buy food. You need to build that convenience into your public transport on your road network so that you can compete with a private car if we're going to genuinely try and have less cars on our road networks. And then take that step forward, much more on our major inter-urban roads. We need to have public transport facilities. And this is just a fast way of thinking about a toolkit of how a designer actually begins to put that onto an inter-urban road network. Because you need to have facilities on your road networks that allow people to have more convenience on public transport so that you can compete with a car. People need to be in rural situations able to drive to a point, walk, cycle to a point, get on the bus, and you need convenience at that point that they get on the bus. What are the facilities that they need when they are boarding? And that's really what I wanted to say. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was very illustrating, isn't it? That total value approach encompassing socio-economic and environmental factors that you were explaining so well, so much anchored in the avoid, shift, improve framework, which is a hierarchy, isn't it? It implies a hierarchy of different strategies. Thanks a lot. Roads as multi-modal platforms, a life cycle approach, the users at the center. Again, a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much. So with that, we are going now towards highways and how smart highways are really requiring long-term investments. And it's Konstantinos Koutsoukos, from the president of Hellastron, who's going to help us understand a bit more what's behind the smart highways and the investments required. Please, Konstantinos, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning to everybody. It is quite amazing to be connected with all these people around the world. Let me start here. Okay. I will try to be brief and just mention the key points of my presentation. And of course, we are able to discuss this later on. Hellastron is an association of the Greek toll road network. And what we have established the last 20 years is that we changed the whole roadway network in Greece. We have basically built it from the scratch, more than 2,000 kilometers. And as you can see in these pictures, some of the pictures show that the result is quite amazing. You can see on this slide on the left, which is a map of Greece, the whole roadwork Hellenic network, which covers all over the country. It is actually a job that most of the people in Greece started 20 years ago and ended up with all this network, and actually a job that we are very proud of, because we were able to move from a network with very big problems with roadway safety to a network that is actually has a major reduction in traffic accidents and improvements in roadway safety. Let me move forward, but to mention what this slide shows basically is that if you can see the trend here, we can clearly see that from the 1990s up to 2040, the things in urban population and the urbanization growth is still going, and it is anticipated that it will continue to grow, which brings us basically to a situation like this. So the more we are able to build additional roads, the more we're able to actually supply the roads, the more we have more people actually using these roads, which brings us basically to a next question, that we need to be clever with the road, and we need to be smart, and we need to have actually a sustainable network in order to cover all these needs that you can see. It's also in these pictures. This slide, I love this slide here because I don't know how many people have realized that back in the first decade of the 20th century, we moved from the horses to basically the cars. And now in the first decade of the 21st century, we basically move from the cars to a sustainable network and to better cars. But pretty much the comparison between the two time periods is the same. So as we have in this slide here, if you think about it, the cars back then were faster than horses, and that was the need. And now we are actually trying to have a reduction of travel time. So we again are looking for faster needs. The cars carried more loads then, reducing the cost. And now we actually reduce the cost of using truck platooning and other sources. Back then, we basically consumed less fuel, the feeding cost when they said back then, but now we're trying to optimize the fuel consumption. And the case goes on and on, which brings us to the question and to the realization that back then we moved from one area to another. It took us almost 100 more years to do so. And now we have another 100 years to actually move from the car area to a smart, if you call it, car area. Now, what we can do with all these things, basically the sustainable mobility and other issues, we can do many things. We can develop, expand an existing infrastructures. We can install new equipment to support the needs. Some of the equipment were already shown in previous presentations. We actually can consider a new dynamic pricing policy, congestion rates. We can consider the cost of guaranteeing of the level of service. We can change the way of thinking. We can change the whole operational philosophy. And actually, as Mike shown in the PRISM presentation, which was very interesting, this philosophy and the whole operational philosophy needs to be changed. We can actually define and establish alternative streams of revenue, and we can do all these things in order to move to a smart area. Now, the successful transition to the smart motorways needs to be based in at least 4 or 5 things. And what are those? The existence of a European and national strategic plan, the collaboration with other industries, the cooperation with other stakeholders, government and mobile operators, and the most important, ensuring the funding over the next decade for this transition. And the bottom line, basically, for all this problem is that the smart motorways demand coordinated, long-scale, long-term innovation investment. The significant financing is something that is needed. And this, according to what we anticipate, will play the key role in order to actually solve all these quote-unquote smart problems. Now, Hellastron, which is the Greek Association of Toll Roadways, as I said, have implemented several innovations in the projects. So we moved to an area that first we built the network, and then we implemented smart highways. There are all these four actually sources of the financial needs. As you know, this extension of concession is one source. The project bonds is another one. The European and national funding programs and other stakeholders. And basically, what we have, as I said before, is the bottom line of everything, which is something that most of the toll operators worldwide believe, and they're thinking up, that we need to set up the time for the toll road industry to define a clear approach for this transition period. It is very important to do this right now, because definitely it will evolve in the next 100 years. So if we take the wrong path, definitely it will be not a very happy situation. Thank you very much, and I hope I was able to keep my presentation within 10 minutes. From what I can see, yes, I did it.
Thank you so very much, Konstantinos. I mean, clearly the caliber here is obvious, isn't it? It's long-term, big scale, as you were saying, and the investment needs are certainly there. Cooperation being key, and it was also very interesting to see some resonances, isn't it, with the previous presenters, as you were saying. You were also hinting at the metropolitan scale somehow, how we cannot be looking just at the urban spaces, and you were certainly hinting again on the intermodality. So thank you so much. We're a bit tight of time, so I'm going to be moving to our next speaker, of course, because we sort of continue in a similar line of conversation, isn't it? And we are going now with Manuela Stockey, who's the Director of International Affairs of AISCAT and the Chair for Sustainability of ASECAP. And Manuela is going to share with us a bit the experience of charting the pathway towards a sustainability report that ASECAP is going through. And Manuela, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maruxa, for this kind introduction, and greetings to everybody from all over the world. And thanks again, IRF, for inviting ASECAP. You know, ASECAP treasures a lot its cooperation with IRF. First of all, I hope you will forgive me because I have got inspiration. I have stolen a little bit the title, the theme of the conference. And I have rephrased it for the title of my presentation. But yes, indeed, in ASECAP, we are really chartering the pathway to draft and to realize an association sustainability report. And I want to share with you this path today. We can go to the next slide, Agostina. Thank you. So here you have a picture, a quick snapshot of ASECAP. On the right, you see the map. So our association, which gathers 135 companies in 20 countries. You see different colors, so the full members, the associated member, and also one supporting partner since 2019 when we changed the bylaws and we wanted also to embrace sustaining partner. And on the left, you have key figures. So the toll revenues, and part of these toll revenues are reinvested by our concessionaire. Also, you see 6 billion of euros per year in road maintenance. I'm happy that James was talking about road maintenance. Also part in contributing to the VAT in the different member states. And you see also the fatality rates for 2020, so focus on road safety, and also the impact on the employment. So all these 135 companies gathered in ASECAP, they also give direct employment to 45,000 people. I think that all these key figures, they are somehow related to sustainability, to the concept of sustainability, because as we will see later on with our report under preparation, our report will not only focus on sustainability with reference to its purely environmental aspects, because on the contrary, we have to see, and in our understanding as ASECAP, we see sustainability in a wider perspective. So embracing, of course, environment as a key pillar, I would say, but also embracing additional aspects related to the sector's contribution to economic development, the improvement of road safety, the development of human resources, the social impact connected with the work activities of road operators, corporate social responsibility, and also the services provided to the users. I'm happy, and I took some notes by the previous speakers. Mike Evans said, he said, deciding a sustainable transport network requires us to think about users. Yes, indeed, also the services to the users are a part of sustainability. We can go to the next slide, Agostina, thank you. And we say, yes, time is right. So also Konstantinos said, now it's the time. It's the time for an association sustainability report, I would say, for two main reasons. On one side, we have the international perspective and guidelines. And I think yesterday it was mentioned quite a lot. You know, on one side, we have in Europe, the European Green Deal and the European Commission Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy. So this ambitious goal of the European Commission to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And in a wider international perspective, we have the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, once again by 2050, so the same objective, to target the carbon-free with climate change challenges, zero fatality, vision zero for road safety, and more inclusive society. And then on the other side, taking into account this international perspective, we have also a sort of mandate by our president. Yesterday, in the welcoming addresses of this conference, you listened to Massimo Schinto, our president of ASECAP, and he spoke about his flagship initiative for his presidential mandate, which is to draft an association sustainability report, and also to focus and to highlight on the fact that our sector is not only managing a physical infrastructure, but on the contrary, our sector is able to to produce multiple positive effects that they go well beyond the mere financial and management aspects. How did we start this path? And we can go to the next slide. Well, first of all, we did not start from scratch because we had a few years ago in ASECAP in 2013, a sort of vision of the toll road operators on sustainability. I know that today is connected our Secretary General, CEO of ASECAP, Malika Seddi, and she was really the driving force of this document. But then we want, to move from this vision to a more structured sustainability report. And here you see in the picture the one we realized in Italy in AISCAT, so in my Italian association, which is a sort of a pilot, I would say, a model that we convey and we bring to ASECAP. We can move to the next one. Thank you, Agostina. We tried to, it was not so easy in the beginning because sustainability, as I say, is a multifaceted issue. So we wanted to create really a focused task force, and it was and it still is, because it is undergoing a great cooperation between two permanent committees of ASECAP. We function as probably every association with technical committees. We have the permanent committee 2 dealing with several issues ranging from road safety, sustainability, communication and marketing, and then a COPER 4 permanent committee 4 dealing with statistics, data collection and analysis of this data. So we created a mixed task force with experts from both committees to collect, of course, the sector's aggregated data in relation to KPIs for sustainability. And it was not easy because in each country, although we have international parameters, standards and guidelines to be followed, each country has some specificities. So we are trying to have homogeneous and common share KPIs. The report will be will have a part presenting the motorway network characteristics. So basically the infrastructure information, and then we'll analyze also, as I said in the beginning, the sector's contribution to environmental impact, economic development, technological innovation. I'm happy that Konstantinos was talking about innovation and the smart roads, work safety and corporate social responsibility. And then then we will also focus on the single initiative of the concessionaire. This is what we did also in the Italian report that I have here, by the way. So it's true that as an association, we will illustrate and present the aggregated data of all the sector, but then we will have specific focuses on the single sustainable initiative of our concessionaire, because they are the real, the road operators. They are the main players. So they promote sustainability on a daily basis in accordance with the sustainable mobility's objectives. We can move on the next one. Thank you, Agustina. Here we described a little bit the process and the methodology. I would say that now we are between the second and the third step. Between the first and the second, it was, as I said, a little bit difficult, but also challenging, to have an exchange of views among the different concessionaires. And then we highlighted also main macro areas, so an infrastructure macro areas, of course, all the network managed by the ASECAP concessionaire with all the elements, work of art, traffic, service areas. We will have an economic macro area, so we will tell about the returns from the income of tolls, the sector contribution to economic development, a social macro area also for users, as I was mentioning, and workers, an environmental macro area, because as I said, environment is a key pillar of sustainability. And also we have called an intellectual macro area related to technology and innovation. And Konstantinos was talking about the importance of innovation. We can move to the next one, Agustina. Thank you. So this is where we are. As I said, it's a work in progress, and we are now proceeding. We have created this very cooperative task force with a diversity also of background and expertise. We will present first of all a statement, an ASECAP statement on sustainability for the upcoming ASECAP Digital Day on the 10th of November. We will have a first draft report by the end of the year, because we will have a general assembly here in Rome, by the way, in my hometown, with all the ASECAP members. And then we think about having a consolidated report, I would say in spring, summer of 2022, together with the organization of a first sustainability forum. And we would like to be a sort of regular appointment, a regular annual meeting for our association. Of course, we are not only looking within our garden, I would say. We are an international association, so we have international cooperation. We have cooperation with the PIARC, the World Road Association. We have a great cooperation and memorandum of understanding with IBTTA, and I'm happy that he is connected today, Mark Muriello, Director of Government Affairs in IBTTA, and also coordinator of the IBTTA Sustainability Task Force. So we have more or less the members of our ASECAP Task Force are also members of the IBTTA one. And then, of course, we have, as I said in the beginning, a great cooperation with IRF. We had an MOU signed more than 2 years ago in Brussels for a reinforced collaboration between our two associations and our members. So we started with road safety, and I just finished with this question: should we build more on sustainability? So I thank you very much, and I'm ready for any question. Thank you, Maruxa.
Thank you so very much, Manuela. I know it's always a race in 10 minutes and we are really tight on time. So good luck for the next steps, and certainly congratulations for getting there. You are already showing us the complexity of putting a process of this kind together, isn't it? And how it really encompasses an ecosystem of actors there. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Conscious of time, I'm going to move to our last but not least set of speakers coming from the International Institute for Sustainable Development is Liesbeth Casier, Senior Policy Advisor, and Laura Turley, Associate. And Liesbeth and Laura, they're going to share some thoughts for tools for evaluating and measuring the sustainability in the road sector. Liesbeth, Laura, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maruxa, and thank you so much to the IRF for the opportunity to be here with you today. I really enjoyed the previous presentations as well, and what myself and what Laura will focus on in the next few minutes is just some more practical tools that we've actually been using at IISD to support governments to integrate the value of sustainability across the infrastructure lifecycle. In our research, looking at identifying what does sustainability actually mean in relation to roads or transport-related infrastructure projects, we've seen that there is a lack of integration of those values when it comes to the tools for infrastructure decision-making. So when we look at cost-benefit analysis, when we look at project finance models, we often don't see the benefits of sustainability reflected in those, and neither do we see the increasing risks in relation to environmental and social factors actually sufficiently being taken into account. We've already heard in previous presentations the climate change risks in relation to the impacts this may have on future maintenance budgets, for example. These are really aspects that we know exist, but we need to measure them and we need to integrate them into the decision-making tools. So we also believe this is knowledge that actually matters across the infrastructure cycle. So not only in the planning and design stages, but also in procurement and also in discussions on financing strategies. So what we need to do is really equip ourselves and the different actors around the table with the knowledge to measure what sustainability means and dare to quantify it also in monetary terms, because we know that that's an important factor in decision making. So what we've worked on over the past years is on a simulation methodology that we call the Sustainable Asset Valuation Methodology, which is basically a toolbox of customized models based on systems thinking, based on system dynamics modeling, to value the externalities in relation to infrastructure projects, roads and transport included, as well as the risks in connection to those projects. And when we have those values more prominently on the table, what we have done is actually include those in customized project finance models for different infrastructure projects to be able to do some scenario analysis and to look at what will the financial viability of a project look like when we internalize some of those externalities and when we actually attribute a value to climate risk. And what we then see as an outcome is that the more sustainable roads and transport-related projects, the more climate resilient we make roads, the better value for money we actually get at the end of the day. I also want to emphasize something that previous speakers have mentioned before, that is looking at the total value, looking at the life cycle of the asset is incredibly important if we want to talk about sustainability. Because a lot of the added benefits of sustainability actually don't necessarily materialize immediately upfront in a construction phase, but do materialize when we look at maintenance, and they do materialize when we look at decommissioning. So it's really important we take that life cycle approach. And on the next slides, I just want to display a few examples of the application of the Sustainable Asset Valuation Methodology to different infrastructure projects across the world. We had the privilege a few years ago to work with the Autoroute du Maroc, the road agency in Morocco, to work on an assessment of the ring road around Rabat, where we did some scenario analysis looking at what's the impact of climate risk on road damages to actually better inform maintenance and operational budgets in that case. We've also looked at a bus rapid transit project that is being currently rolled out in Dakar in Senegal, where we did some scenario analysis, again, looking at what are some of the environmental and social benefits of a BRT system compared to not implementing this specific BRT project. And the example of the graph that you see here on the slides is the congestion index that was calculated for when we implement a BRT system. That's actually the bottom line. We see a lower congestion than when a BRT system would not be implemented. And that's, for example, a value that we could use to calculate some of the avoided health-related costs in relation to a reduced pollution as a result of implementing a BRT system in Dakar. And again, this is just by means of example to give you a flavor of what I believe the sector is currently able to actually calculate, but which is something that we need to do much more. We've also assessed a public bike sharing system in Delhi, in India, looking again at what are some of the environmental social benefits in comparison to not implementing such projects, where we saw quite positive impacts again, not only on the environmental side, but also on the social side. The issue of access has been mentioned before as well. Very important, roads and transport are an enabler to more economic activity. And we need to take those systemic impacts, those much wider impacts actually into account, even when we make project by project decision making. And lastly, and as an example that's not here on the slide, but is something that we're looking into in the future, is also looking at the value of nature-based solutions in relation to the value that they can bring to, for example, protecting roads from flooding, and so from the impacts of climate change. Over the next 2 years, we hope to do many more of these type of assessments on roads and transport-related infrastructure to exactly provide that much more integrated knowledge to really inform that shift towards sustainable mobility. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Just to continue with the limited time we have left. In addition to mobilizing savvy at IISD, we also advise governments on the public procurement process and how to use the process, the steps involved in public procurement to become a driver of sustainable consumption and production. So as most of you already know, public authorities are major consumers, and when they can use their purchasing power to demand more environmentally or socially friendly goods, services, and infrastructure, it can make an important contribution. Roads are a clear example of a sector in which public procurement has a high spend and also high impact in terms of environmental, social, and economic externalities. And these externalities can indeed be negative or positive. So for realizing sustainable public procurement, we've noticed in Europe, certainly in the past 10 years, there's been a favorable policy environment with the EU Procurement Directive of 2014 that gives procuring authorities the possibility, at least, to compare bids, not only on the lowest cost today, but on the most economically advantageous tender. And this can mean for a procurement agency looking to procure roads that we can consider costs that might arise over the life cycle of the road. So long-term maintenance costs, like Liesbeth was talking about, waste management, end of life, lighting, etc. Just briefly, the EU has followed up with criteria for implementing GPP, and there's one indeed for road design, construction, and maintenance. It could be a resource, of course, for EU procurement agencies, but also beyond, out of interest. So within the umbrella of sustainable procurement, a specific and very urgent issue, of course, is the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with the Paris Agreement, with the upcoming COP in Glasgow. And we know that public procurement, once again, can play a role in encouraging low carbon procurement in particular. So for example, an agency seeking to build and upgrade a road can use the procurement process to make sure value is understood more broadly. And this goes back to Mr. Evans' presentation as well from ARUP. About the need to think about value in a broader basis, because indeed we're living in a period where values are shifting, and it's important to keep up with these changes. So, here. In spite of the clear advantages of using procurement processes for environmental and social sustainability goals, GPP has not always been mainstreamed, and it indeed remains limited in many places to case studies or to front runners, cities, and regions. There's certainly an implementation gap going to an enabling environment to practicing it. And so something that we just wanted to share in these last few minutes is a tool that's worked in the Netherlands to put low carbon procurement in particular into practice and to mainstream it. It's called the CO2 Performance Ladder, and it's an instrument that uses the power of green procurement to reduce carbon emissions of governments, heavy industries, and their supply chains. So it's at both times a carbon management tool and a procurement tool. So when it's used as a procurement tool, procurement authorities can reward CO2 reductions by giving an award advantage. And the higher the ambition level of the company, the higher the award advantage can be in the procurement process with this tool. To get certified, organizations are assessed annually as to whether or not they meet the criteria of the performance ladder. And this is through an accredited third party and not through the procurement agency itself. In the Netherlands, at least, there's already 4,000 organizations that are certified and 150 procuring parties. And at the moment, we are launching a new project with the Foundation for Climate Friendly Procurement in Business, SCOW, who are the owner and manager of the tool. And we're looking forward to launching it over the next 2 years, and indeed looking for any interested parties who might be interested in ways to use the tool in the procurement of roads or maintenance projects. So I will hope I've been quick enough. I skipped over some details there, but I'll pass it back over to you, Maruxa.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Liesbeth and Laura. Much appreciated. That call for further boosting the measuring and the monitoring of sustainability benefits and risks to get that overall, isn't it, notion of value for money, and certainly the incredible potential of procurement for governments can lead by example and can support the penetration and the fast tracking even of certain sustainability approaches. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been a race against the clock. Susanna has kindly given us a few extra minutes, but literally just a very few extra minutes in order to be able to tackle some of the questions we've got in the chat. I'm going to be really asking our panelists and our keynote, Jamie, as well, to perhaps put their cameras on now, if you don't mind, and keep it really to the minimum. You know, if you can respond in less than 1 minute, that'll be terrific. So Jamie, we had 2 questions related to your presentation. One, it's like, to what extent ADB has got a role in tribal connectivity in South Asia? And then a bit of a provoking one, isn't it? How useful could it be to have so many indicators? So the granularity, I guess, you know, of the data. I would like to address to Laura or to Liesbeth the question that is asking about a bit more on the methodology, particularly on resilience, on climate resilience, for the SAVI methodology. If you think you need a fuller answer than what I'm giving you in a few seconds, please continue on the chat box. And Emanuela, just a quick one for you. I mean, why do you think, what 2 different reports, you know, what is the differences between having a sustainability report for a concessionary company and a sustainability report for an association? Why do you think we need those 2? So come on, let's start a bit this marathon at a sprinter pace, please. Jamie, so let's start with you.
I'll try to be very quick. Our safeguards policy incorporates 3 main components. It's environmental, it's resettlement, and it's indigenous people. So for all of our work, we assess the safeguards requirements. So I hope that addresses the tribal part of the question under our indigenous people. I would stress also that it's not just limited to that. All of our projects have gender action plans, so we are broader than just pure safeguards in terms of environment, resettlement, and indigenous people. On data, admittedly, the more indicators we have, the better the decisions can be taken. Data is poor in many cases, so not all information will be able to be provided on all indicators. But I think sometimes holes in database tell as much of a story as where we actually have the data. Why is that data not being collected is also a question that should be pushed as well. So it's to have the list of indicators, but to understand that not every single one must be recorded in entirety on a year-by-year basis. But yes, we should be discussing all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. That was terrific. So Laura, Liesbeth, anything you would like to share in a few seconds? I know it doesn't honor the entirety of the methodology, but please, climate resilience in particular in the SAVI methodology.
So actually, I put 2 links in the chat as well, because there's I think a lot to say around it. Perhaps just in relation to the other question on indicators as well. There are many, and yes, the granularity is just necessary, because what if we are not granular enough? I think the costs are far higher to do so in that case. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, you're being terrific. I appreciate it. And Manuela, so sustainability report for both a concessionary company and an association. Why 2 different reports, you know?
Actually, I would say there is a main difference, if you want. The concessionary companies, likewise other companies in the economic and industrial sector, they have a legislative obligation, you know, to draft and to present sustainability report, mainly those companies listed in the financial capital market, which is not the same for an association. So I would say it is a sort of voluntary initiative for an association, also to present global aggregated data. I saw also a question in the chat, in the Q&A, why do you need so many KPIs? Yes, because sustainability, as I say, is a multifaceted issue. So we need lots of KPIs to provide a global perspective of a whole association and not only of the single members. I hope it answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. You've been terrific in timekeeping. I think we're coming to an end. I know we could continue the conversation for many more minutes, you know, but certainly we hope that it's been clear to everyone the extent to which the value of transport is undeniably economic, because it keeps the economy moving and it generates investment, but it's also social, it's also environmental, and it's also about the resilience, isn't it? The capacity of our societies and our economies to keep on moving in times of hardship. So thank you so very much. I have to pass it on to Susanna with a particular thanks for you know, the opportunity for SLOCAT to be here, and wishing you the best in the continuation of the conversations. Thank you, fellow panelists, for making it so easy on the moderator. A lot to say in little time. So thanks very much, and over to you, Susanna.